Woher kommt die Melissa?
In Herne.
Und Mama und Papa, wo kommt ihr her? Philippinen oder?
Nein, die ist auch in Herne.
Kommt ihr irgendwie, wo kommt ihr her? Aus welchem Land? Gebürtig?
Ich weiß es nicht.
Bist du die Mama? Wo kommt ihr her?
Ich komme aus Thailand.
Ah, Thailand.
So today is going to be a pretty heavy topic because I know that some of you might get defensive, some of you might not even believe me, but I find that it is super important to raise awareness about this. Now, Germany will always have a very special place in my heart. Its language is always going to be the most favorite one that I probably will ever speak. Those years abroad, they were literally the best years of my life, despite what I'm going to tell you about. I lived abroad in other places and traveled around a bit. I had very similar experiences in those places like Italy, Morocco, Spain, etc. I'm just focusing on Germany because that is where I spent the most time. My particular experience that I'm about to talk about is echoed by different people that look like me, who I know. Here on Language Travel Adoptee, I not only talk about the strategic advice that you need in order to learn a language more efficiently, I also concentrate a lot more on how identity, belonging, and less discussed language topics affect us as well as others who are learning language. I'm committed to giving an unpolished, unapologetic look into the language process. You hear so much about languages open different cultures to me, languages open up different perspectives for me, that's why I learned them. Yes, that is great advice to follow. Beyond that, there are specific and quite frankly very painful experiences that some language learners go through due to their complex relationships with identity and belonging and race even. Language learning, with all of its benefits, has led me and can lead others into some pretty negative experiences. Second disclaimer is for everyone in the comments who sees something wrong with my experience or the feelings that are associated with that. Just because you have not had the same experience as someone else does not mean that it is right to gaslight them or invalidate what they are feeling. We have seen so many events around the world that do not happen to us personally. It's not part of our life story. However, those events happened, they are real, and they are all the more real for people who actually experience them. You don't have to agree necessarily with me or be in some way satisfied with what I'm about to share, but I do challenge you to broaden your perspective and just accept that radically different life experiences can coexist at the same time. You guys, I'm gonna be honest, I was really scared making this video because I have felt so alone in my feelings, and it's because no one else made this kind of content. I still get invalidating comments on my YouTube videos just about my identity in terms of my race, and I am here to dispel everything so that I can at least show this video to people who are inevitably going to say the same thing to me. But I was particularly given courage by this one tweet. It really showed me that there was someone who opened the floor for discussion for this topic that I've never really seen touched on before in the language learning communities I follow online. Someone acknowledges, besides me, that this can be a very painful, uncomfortable experience of the language learning process that not everyone will face, but a certain group of people will. I've had to keep this personal reality very hidden from everyone else. And what I mean by reality is really being introduced to a new level of racism in Europe when I went over there due to my passion for language learning. The only advice I got for languages was how to learn a language fast, or I would just see learners repeatedly talk about how fantastic it was to always be introduced to new cultures, different perspectives, different people. So I agree with them a lot, but I do want to say that in reality, I had some really bad experiences, mainly in Germany and Italy, trying to adapt as much as I could by learning and being the best I could be at language learning. German and Italian mainly is where I chose to focus my attention on and really assimilate as much as I could into the culture, the lifestyle, the mentality, etc. I really wanted to embody the language and everything around the language as much as I could back then. And ultimately, my goal was to be accepted by cultures who I eventually found out would not accept me back. Part of this bottling up inside me was really constant invalidation of my identity, of where I knew I belonged, of things that I just knew about myself, because we all know ourselves the best. I always advocate for that. Many were very insistent that I did not and that they knew better. Let me give you some context. I went to Italy back in 2017. I went to Germany right after going to Italy. I went to a university. I stayed there for a year. And as language learners, we all know, where are you from? That is one of the first expressions that we learn because that is how you introduce yourself to others. Also saying I am not, insert nationality here. That also proves to be a very good conversation starter. This is where my adoption story comes in, and I really recommend that you check it out if you have not already. It is essential in understanding more about where I am coming from, telling you all of this in context of my experience in Germany. But basically though, I do not look like the typical American according to outside standards of the USA. I came from a less typical family structure where I was adopted from China by a family who is a different race from me. That adoption was caused by the one-child policy that tore families apart originally. And as a baby, I was brought to the US. But I always knew that my real family was the one who raised me from the get-go whenever I was adopted. They raised me with the culture, the mannerisms, the native language. Obviously, English is my first language, and I was monolingual until I was 18. So they raised me with all the traits that really make up a lot of who I am, what I still use to define myself today with. So it's always been that way. But again, I was just different from what people abroad expected me to be. My cultural identity happened to not match my ethnic identity, and I always have and still do identify myself fully with my cultural identity. I have never had an identity crisis feeling stuck between two worlds, like between the US where I was adopted and China where I was born, not knowing where I belonged, because I always found pretty much full belonging in the US where I grew up. This question, where are you from? That is a question that a lot of people take for granted. And after I started living in Germany for a little bit, I started to be really careful about how I approached answering this, because inevitably the question after that, where are you really from, would come up. And most of the people that I spoke to were not satisfied with my initial response, I'm American. And then after that, I would insist, yes, I'm still American. My mom came from here and here. Still, they thought that I was not a true American because of how I looked. And a lot of people started to ask very personal questions that you would not ask a stranger that you just met. I just know others would have never received these sorts of questions. And meanwhile, I kept on noticing that my white friends who were American were automatically believed about where they came from. Having people constantly invalidate me just because I did not fit into where they thought I belonged, it made me feel like I was the only one going through these tough feelings, experiencing this hard reckoning with how the world defined belonging, sticking to ethnic identity and cultural identity essentially being the same thing, and that your ethnic identity was always stronger than your cultural identity, or should be if there was ever a discrepancy between the two. I had to really come to terms with accepting that, which was really painful to go through, versus my desire to so desperately be accepted into Italian culture first because I spent my time there first, and then by the German culture, whose language I was obsessed with. I would spend hours and hours researching how German culture was, ultimately finding belonging, which is what I think all of us want in the end. So of course I have had others say, well, maybe they are just asking, where are you really from, just because they're curious. And I'm going to tell you of two groups of people that fit into how this question was approached and how my answer to that question was approached. So the first group of people were genuinely curious. Some were very respectful when I set my boundaries and I said I didn't want to talk about it anymore, or they accepted that I was American, even though they had sort of like a confused look on their face. They were polite enough to get to know me a little bit more before inquiring more. But again, they would still ask, where are you really from? That carries two aspects with it. So number one, that carries the implication that you aren't really where you say you're from. I am constantly reminded of people thinking that I do not belong where I know that I do. Maybe once or twice, people are jerks sometimes, or people don't mean to hurt your feelings when they do, but having that thrown at me like several times throughout a day, especially because I was abroad and I was meeting so many new people from different countries, getting that question over and over and over again, it is exhausting. And the persistence of people was very interesting, if not exhausting too, because I noticed that I had never gotten this question when I was in the US growing up. Being reminded that these people don't believe you and your identity, and they also think they know you in a sense better than you do because they don't accept your initial answer. I understand the curiosity, but I just wish people would even just try to get to know me more before asking super personal questions about my background that they wouldn't have asked me if I were white, basically. We are strangers after all. When we are introducing ourselves, all I've wanted to do in most of those conversations is switch to another subject. Now, the second group of people that I encountered were a lot less pleasant, even though both of these are really unpleasant the more that you are asked this question. These people were not coming from a place of curiosity. There's a line between being curious and then interrogating someone. Being curious is where you are open to whatever comes your way, and interrogation is different. And the people that have asked me that in this way are already made up in their minds about where I'm from, where I should be from, and then they'll interrogate me as much as they can with really roundabout questions until they finally reach some level of satisfaction and feel like they've won, in a sense, of me confessing that they're right about where I come from. This is exhausting also because this particular group, they keep on pushing it further and further if they are not satisfied. They just have an agenda, and it's a really uncomfortable and exhausting experience to go through. Another very popular question that this second group of people would ask me would be, woher kommen deine Eltern? That would be, where are your parents from? As an adoptee, I wish that I weren't adopted whenever being asked that question, because of course, my mom who adopted me is a different race than I am. I would say, oh, my mom's from the eastern part of the United States. And then sometimes they would ask, oh, did she immigrate? Why should I tell you about my adoption when we just met? And then I thought, at least Asian-looking people who come from traditional families, as in they were never adopted, they can say, oh, my parents came from Vietnam, or they came from the Philippines, something like that, to just end the conversation. When I didn't give them a clear answer as to why we were different races, like there were just some points where I just didn't feel like talking about adoption. Sometimes there would not be a way to escape. I felt cornered in a way to keep on responding, keep on saying I didn't want to talk about it, and then keeping on being questioned constantly. Sometimes I would revel in the fact of leaving this person confused with information that they were not entitled to know in the first place, and especially them asking more about my adoption story if I was just exhausted and I just told them that I was adopted. Given this happened like 5 years ago, whenever I jumped into this world of language learning and using my languages abroad, I was much more privy to being adopted. It wasn't a part of me that I really wanted to talk about, and I hadn't processed it. And I've talked about this in my adoption story too. The hardest part, I think, about being a culturally American but ethnically Asian person who spoke fluent German was that they couldn't grasp that Asian-looking people are just as American and can be American citizens just like any other ethnicity. There's a lot of lack of representation in our media. It's getting a little bit better, but I never saw myself represented, and the rest of the world did not either. But the daily interrogation, confusion of why I spoke German, why I spoke all of these Western European languages and no Asian language, why I had no connection to any Asian culture, and more importantly, had no desire to do so, as well as the frequent microaggressions and the frequent racial harassment that I received both from students, professors, random people on the street, drunk people. All of that was way too much for me to truly want to stay in Germany and really truly want to stay abroad permanently, which is what I originally thought I wanted. I'm not going to talk about the many other instances where I faced a lot of racism, but you can check out Bluminescence's video up here because I can relate to her experiences a lot as an Asian American going abroad. I love speaking the German language. I also felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells in Germany, as well as a lot of other places abroad, due to being an adopted person of color without the traditional family unit. I also feel like in the USA, even though we do have problems with racism, obviously, the US gives the most opportunities and platforms for people to actually speak out about these things and have more of a likelihood of being believed. I think especially for Asian Americans, racism against us is very different from other races, and our sort of racism tends to be very subtle, very hidden, and the most likely to be minimized and passed off as a joke. Hence why I feel the most home here in the US where I am currently. And despite speaking German, where I had so much feedback about, wow, you sound like a native, like you have no accent, despite even majoring in the German language, despite doing my best to learn as much as I could about the language and fit in a sense, it was very true that I would never and will never be accepted as German. And I know a lot of people of color who I have talked to who have been raised in Germany who still do not feel like they are taken seriously or believed as being just as German as everyone else because they were raised there, they speak the language as a native, and they have been raised with the cultural norms that any other German would be raised with. So I'm very thankful I did not grow up in Europe. Other people of color who have experience living abroad, they may not share my same experiences. People who you know who may look like me may not share my same experiences. Even if you have a few person of color friends who say they don't take offense to it, don't assume that other people who look like them or have a similar background and will feel the exact same way. This experience being rejected from a society that I really wanted to be a part of because I love language learning so much. It led me to an interesting observation about the world, because every country I have visited so far, besides the US where I lived, is very still homogenous. It's homogenous in mindset as well, even though there are different looking people who live amongst themselves. There are still very set ideas of what it means to identify and what it means to belong. It also just showed me how hypocritical some travelers and language learners could be. There's always this reason of, oh, I travel because I love discovering different perspectives and learning about different cultures and people. Same thing with language learners. And then they meet me. I think my story is part of being an American, but it is a very different perspective that has not been given voice at all. Many choose to still not truly listen to it. People who are similar to me, who have known about or experienced the same things as I have, they are also silenced in a way. We don't like being challenged, right, on our perspective. We like being right. I like being right too, but the fact that people thought I was wrong about my experience was heavily upsetting to me, and it still is. But I want to be open and honest on this channel. Again, totally unpolished, unapologetic with how the language learning process has had its effect on me in very profound and sometimes painful ways. There are other doors that language learning opens that introduce me to some very disappointing and negative realities of life. I've had to really reflect on those interactions with those kinds of people that I've been talking about who have said those things to me. And I know we are all going through our own things. It has taken me so much time to find compassion for them. I now know how to save my energy and not engage with those who will drain it through interrogation and validation. I know how to cut people off to defend myself if I really need to. But this acceptance of all of this and creating different coping mechanisms for it happened over a period of 7 years, and I'm still learning. It is not a linear process. Healing is not a linear process in general. Just because I say, yes, I have come up with how to handle it, that does not dismiss the fact of being rejected in that way by a society that I really loved and I still love. That does not take away the pain that I initially felt and that sometimes I still feel when I look back on it from a more accepting perspective, right? You can accept it and still feel pain. And I know that we want to feel immediately helpful to someone in need, right? But it's just important to acknowledge that the pain is there, make space for whoever is feeling this sort of pain that maybe you don't even quite understand because you haven't had the same experience. Just let it be instead of coming with all these solutions, what we think might be comforting to the person. Because I think sometimes with facing these sorts of things, it is most important to let that person breathe without wanting to feel like we have to fix something for them. Despite all of these technological advances around the world, we all still have so much work to do on compassion, on actual listening to other humans, on building kindness within ourselves, towards ourselves as well as towards others. German has really taught me, I do have something important to teach. It's taught me to stand up for myself, to use my own voice, to really recognize how I can show up the most authentic way for me. In a twisted way, thank you, German, for introducing this part of my life to me, even though it was one of the hardest periods to go through. For those who are going through a similar experience, or you already have, or you know someone who has, know that you are not alone. And I really hope to provide you in this video with even just a moment of solidarity. Make sure to give a like if you did enjoy and subscribe if you have not, because I do like to talk about all sides of my language learning, not just this super heavy side. Believe me, there are times and places for everything. So I hope to be coming out with varied content very soon. Stay tuned for that. See you later.